Hey there. Welcome to the fifth episode of Unconditioned, which was previously our Fetters Fireside podcast. Today I have with me Vasco Quieros, and I hopefully I pronounced the name right. And yeah, how are you doing, Vasco? How are you doing?
I'm all right, Michael. I'm all right. How are you?
Decent. It's kind of early in San Francisco currently, but that's good. Okay, let's jump into our conversation of the day. Like I mentioned, we're refocusing the conversation from just feathers, which is what we've accustomed people to more of a conversation about all the conditions that someone might gather up in a lifetime and how each of us ended up in a more unconditioned place. So let me start up, and I know you just freshly doxed yourself last week. So let's start with your freshly doxed story about how you started with meditation and where basically your curriculum went.
Sure. So I guess it started in 2012. It started briefly after my grandmother passed away, who I was very close to, actually. Maybe the person I was the closest to. And at around the same time, I was also reading less wrong. I moved to Vienna to study cognitive sciences. And so, between my grandmother passing and all the stuff against death on less wrong, I was pretty concerned with death. I had night terrors about it. I would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, like the whole shebang. It was quite hardcore a couple of months, and then, and relatively, or so I thought, a few months pass. I'm in Vienna. I convinced this person who I met through Less Wrong to come hang out at my place, and she brings a book called The Motivation Hacker by Nick Winter. And Nick Winter is this guy who is also in San Francisco. He's a programmer, and at the time he was doing a bunch of challenges and then wrote a book about them. Stuff like learning how to throw axes, lucid dreaming, talking to girls, whatever. And I just read it. And one night, afternoon, I'm taking a nap, as we Europeans do. This after reading the chapter on lucid dreaming. And I have a lucid dream, like my first lucid dream. Yeah. I was in my grandparents' house. I was flying, the whole thing. It was extraordinary. And I didn't realize it at the time. But now looking back, I think that basically that lucid dream was an arising and passing away moment. Because soon after I get all of the, classical elements of extreme energy. Right after that, I start meditating. I get super into it. I get into Zen focusing. I start doing therapy. My charisma is off the charts. I won't say more than that.
Humble brag.
I won't say more than that. But you can just imagine I had a very nice 6 months after that. And I think that's when it started for me. After that, I was meditating every day for it's funny now, but 5 to 15 minutes. I think I had a spontaneous jhana pretty early on. And then it was pretty on and off for the next 11 years or so. Few months on, few months off. Yeah.
And then you found jhanas and you became a very avid fan of it.
Well, before that even, so back in 2023, so this is 11 years after that arising and passing away. Lots of stuff have happened. Good stuff, bad stuff, mostly bad stuff, dark night type stuff, as it goes. But 2023, there's one day, a particular day that I remember that everything, I think it was 14th of April 2023, everything was perfect on paper. So, I had roof over my head, loving girlfriend, I had food, I had, my body was fine, I was physically healthy, I had some money, etc. And yet I felt that I was suffering immensely, actually. And on that day, I hadn't meditated in forever, but something turned on inside. And I sat for 1 hour straight that day, and then did that for the following 100 or so days, then 2 hours for a bunch of days. And then I tried to do 3 hours. I never got to 3 hours, but I tried many times. Yeah. Then after that, I am posting on Twitter about it. I'm into it, right? Now I'm really doing it. And there's this account called, I believe, Happy Undivided Ball of Bliss, who says, which I kind of had never heard of before, but I'm just talking about my practice at home, whatever. It goes, yo, it's time for you to do a retreat. Like, it's overdue. Like, it's time. And this is already January 2024. And then it is when journals were very big on Twitter at the time, mostly because of Nick Camerata, also Base Lord, Journey, of course. And then I do my first Journey retreat, January 2020.
Yeah. I know and I remember from the conversation with Daniel in the Met again.
Yeah.
Shout out Daniel. That you mentioned
Shout out
your stream
Daniel.
entry happened there. I do remember that you mentioned the stream entry happened there. I'm actually curious, how do you describe the phenomenology of stream entry? You know, like being in this space, in the meditation space, where everyone has opinions about everything. There are, of course, conflicting definitions conflicting definitions of stream entry have existed for thousands of years. But I'm curious how you describe the before and after of stream entry, because phenomenology is way more consistent for stream entry other than definitions that sound magical or anything. So how would you describe that experience?
Yeah. So the way it happened for me was on the 5th or 6th day of the 7-day journey retreat, which, to be clear, I went into just because I wanted to experience the jhanas. I didn't sign up for anything other than that. I just wanted to enjoy. But one day I am going out of the place that I was staying in, and if I opened the door, I was immediately on the street. So it was this apartment that gave way to the street. And this is at the end of the day. So I had already been meditating a bunch of day. And I remember as I exit the house in very quick succession, and I only noticed because I was powered up, so to speak, my awareness, which before was about the height of the ceiling of the house I was in, completely explodes, like gets completely expansive to, I don't know, the edge of the universe or whatever. And almost immediately, a very triggering thought comes, almost as if to like push it down. So it goes like, awareness is to the extent of the ceiling, and then awareness is about that extent outside with a thought above, so to speak. But there was this moment that was sub-second. So this whole thing is sub-second. And, I almost got caught up by that thought and almost got, triggered by it and into it and ruminating it, whatever. But some part of me just went like, huh? Like, what was that? And the moment that I did that, I started to experience immense psychomotor retardation. So my walking became extremely slow, like as if I was on ice. Like I had intended to go to a place to do walking meditation, and I couldn't get there. And I felt that something had shifted. And then the specific shift, how I described it soon after, was that up to that time, I had always felt that there were two types of things. There was this, which is me, or which I associated with me.
Yeah.
And then there was everything else. And these were two different kinds. And the shift, and further, this was the main thing. Like everything else was kind of like secondary or something. So this was like of ontological primacy or importance, and everything else was secondary. And then the shift was suddenly this was not the main thing anymore. The main thing was way up and back there. And now this was of the same kind as everything else. And that felt horrible. That felt like dying. The way that felt was that I died while still alive. It felt really, really bad. Soon after that, I think maybe the next day, there was a tension that I had between my eyebrows that I had not noticed before, but that unscrunched, almost as if you had a sheet of paper and it was all scrunched and it just went like it undid itself. And after that period, and since then, it felt like my suffering got capped. So whereas before it felt like at least potentially suffering was infinite or nearly infinite, like it could always get worse. Now it felt like there was a hard cap, and that I had lost the ability to make it that bad. Like, which is a weird reversal, right? I think people usually think suffering is something that happens to you, not something that you do. But the sense was there was a way maybe subconsciously or whatever, that I was very actively contributing to the propagation and enlargement of my own suffering. And I lost the ability to do that. So that was the shift.
Got it. I'm not sure if you keep track. Like you mentioned the cap. Do you have any way of framing? I usually frame it from 100% full suffering to how much it reduces. For me, suffering from some stream entry has been a good 5 to 10% permanent, let's call it. And then for a day when it happened, like really great, but it returned. So like, do you have a number like that? Like, okay, that was the hard cap 100%. Where was the hard cap, or how would you frame it?
Yeah. There's something that meditation stuff has said on Twitter, which is like, he keeps saying that it's almost logarithmic or something, and that the last 1% makes like all of the difference, basically.
Yeah.
I think for me, the stream entry was the most surprising one, because it did feel before that suffering was at least potentially infinite, and after it wasn't anymore. And that felt like a huge, very, very large difference, because now it's not like I'm afraid of this, infinite hell or whatever. It's like, I'm afraid of something that can get pretty bad, but it's like, it's capped. It's limited, not infinitely bad. And so that discrete change from presumed or fear infinity to feared infinity, even if very large, for me made a very big difference. Even if in sort of absolute terms, or compared to what maybe I will still experience in the future, then I'm going to look back and be like I have no idea.
Yeah, amazing. So one of the things that amused me from your conversation with Daniel, and I laughed a lot, was the part about our first call. And I honestly cannot remember it. I think I was in Barcelona at the time. I might have been last year.
Yeah.
But you might have a better memory. Like, what was the whole setup? I cannot remember. You said something like, I tricked you, and I found it so fun. I laughed a lot. So it's like, what was the setup, if you remember? Like, how did you get to talking, basically?
Do I ever remember? Yes, I remember. So basically the story was that, something shifted last year. I wanted to make money, and I felt like I could make money online. And I wrote a tweet that was something like, I'm ready to whore myself out to Babylon. Like, if you're interested in my services, you know what I'm about, reach out. Like, right? Something like this.
Yeah.
Something on brand. And few people reached out. You were one of them. And then this is my interpretation of our conversation. My interpretation was that you're saying something like, I have this stuff, these feathers, this suffering reduction that I can provide to people. I'd love to talk to you about how to frame it, how to position it. It's like, I believe it's very valuable, but there's details about how exactly to present it to people, how to package it. Like, let's talk. And I was like, great, like already got an engagement. This is amazing. And so we start talking. Basically, somehow you were basically guiding me through the feathers. That's what happened. So we're having this business conversation, this very serious business conversation. Like, I don't know, how are we going to do this? And what's the fee, and what's this and what's that, and how do we present? And then every once in a while you'd go something like, oh, so what's your experience right now? It's like, okay, yeah, interesting. Okay. And so from 1 to 10, how bad would you say that is? It's like, okay, whatever, right? And then you get back to the business conversation. And so if you broke your leg, you would say that's like an 8, right? Something like that. Okay. And so now that you compare it to breaking your leg, how bad was it really? And I'd be like, I don't know, 3 or whatever, right? Like it would come down a lot. And so basically you were guiding me through this process that I believe, or at least at the time, was what you used to guide people to Weekend Fetters 4 and 5.
Yeah.
And it stayed with me. It stayed with me, basically, from that conversation. And then later, in a moment that I was very desperate, it came back to me. So I was very, very grateful that it stayed with me, and that you had done that sort of ninja master thing, inception of the feathers.
I'm semi-sorry for this. Okay, so that was the first one.
Please don't be sorry.
I honestly, my memory is not what it used to be. I do remember
a famous side effect.
Yeah, I do remember our conversations, like the further conversations towards closer to your breaking. I remember I was in Barcelona at the time, and I think you were going through something. You can decide how much details you want to give, but it wasn't necessarily a good thing. You were going through I remember this particular work. The reason why it's that I was waiting for Brent B. Shout out.
Shout out
I
Brent
was
B.
waiting for him. Yeah, I was waiting for him at the Barceloneta beach. And you messaged me. I was like, okay, let's just jump in a call right now. So like that's not an issue. I'm curious how you describe, because that seemed like a period of high suffering from you. So I'm curious how that started
Oh yeah.
and how that continued for you towards breaking.
Yeah, definitely. So this was so stream entry experience January or early 2024. This is now summer 2025, and so my experience was that after the stream entry or the capping, there was lots of it's almost as if suffering had been gathering at the base, right? It's like, we cut a bunch of it, but then the remaining is like gathering into something stronger and bigger, right? And then like kind of coming back from the unconscious until the conscious again.
It's very
and
common.
In my yeah. So that was the experience. Like it was becoming more and more obvious and more present in my experience. So my experience was not anymore, oh, it used to be so bad and now it's fine. It's like, oh no, there's still all of this stuff. And it's becoming increasingly obvious. And then in my personal life, I was going through a rough period, which helped to make evident the way that I was dealing with this or vulnerable to all of this suffering. And yeah, so, sometimes in my despair, I text you, and it was very funny to me the way that you would always be on the way to something or doing something, and then, just kind of like, like I'm in the pit of suffering, right? I'm in the depths of capped hell. And then you're just like, hey, I'm coming from the beach and I'm going to the shop. Right? Yeah. Like, hey,
I had the best view. Yeah, I had the best view. Yeah. That's
no, but it was great because it was like a proof of possibility that something else is possible. And also you were not buying into my frame. You're like, yes, and you're in the pits of hell, and also there's heaven right over here. And like, it's not a big deal to be in hell, right? So I think we did a bunch more calls of that sort. Usually, you were very chill, and I was like, please help me. And then we're running through the process, like this process that you had. And I just,
if you want to describe it, I'm actually curious, because sometimes it helps others having the frame of the process, how you see it. One of the things that often happens with people is like, somehow process won't work for me. The whole terminally special, when the frame or from AA, it's like people think they're terminally special and somehow this process won't work for them. What is your interpretation of how the process goes? Because I'm mostly curious, like, I'm also often curious about how universal do you feel this process is. Like, oh, there are some people that this would work forever. So it's like, do you feel like this is the kind of process that would mostly work for anyone, and how you frame it, how you explain it?
I don't even think that's how I would think about it. Like the way I'd think about it is the potential upside is so large, and the cost of trying is so low that it's like, it's quite obvious to try it at least try it, right? Like it's so unbelievably cheap for what it might give you. So that's on the latter side of your question. On the former side of your question, so basically the process as I was running it, or as I remember it, was, there's some experience, there's some unpleasantness in experience. You rate it. You play in your mind breaking your leg or something like that. You rate that. Now you go back and you rate the first one, and it's like, it's not as big. And then you basically cycle through this a bunch, and kind of like seeing it from a more objective perception, as it were, or a perspective, and kind of like getting detached of your own interpretation of what's happening, and not being so directly fused with the experience. Basically running through these cycles a bunch of times, right? Because I think originally stuff comes quite tightly coupled, and then you're just doing this over and over and over and over, so that you might actually look at it instead of exist from it. So that's how I framed it to myself. I hope I did a good enough job. And to the experience of breaking, so that was very, very surprising to me. So basically the way that happened was, again, summer, I'm sleeping outside of my place, like not in the place that I would usually sleep in, and I wake up at 3 or 4 a.m. in this dark room. I'm super disoriented, and I'm like, full blown panic attack. Like, I don't know what was going on. I don't know if I had bad dreams. I don't know if it was like CO2 poisoning. Like, I have no idea what was going on. I just know I'm full blown panic attack. Further, I was familiar with this because I had this since I was 15 or something. So I kind of know how they go. I know that they last a long time. I know that they trickle down over many hours, etc. And so I'm kind of bracing for all of that. In my dazed despair, and thanks to my practice, I believe, and because the practice was somewhat automatic, I reached for it. So I started running the practice, right? So I'm like panicking, pacing around, whatever. But in my mind, I'm like running the practice. And at some point, and I remember this moment very vividly, suddenly the panic completely subsides.
Yeah.
It just goes from 100% full blown panic attack to nothing.
Just sensations.
Just like it wasn't there anymore. And I remember being super confused, like what just happened, and just looking around, kind of almost as if looking for it, like what the hell was this? Because I have never experienced anything like this, right? Like in my past, it was always full blown panic attack, pace over time, slowly distract yourself, whatever goes down, and here it was just like it was gone. And so then I don't know, like few minutes, dazed and confused and grateful, go to sleep. And the next morning, I felt again that there had been a shift, like something changed. And then after that, I started noticing all types of fun stuff where I still get triggered by stuff that would trigger me in the past, but it all falls off much quicker. So, I'm in traffic, someone cuts me off, I start rolling down the window and I start shouting, and then midway through, it just drops. Like I'm like, like I can't keep it up anymore.
Yeah, Kevin used to call that basically being like in a circus without a safety net. The safety net was the usual reaction. Like what you would do is like, oh, I don't need a safety net. Like I almost like I want to jump on it because I have it there. But it's like, I don't need a safety net. Like I don't need to basically get angry at this person just because I feel bad right now. So it's like, I'm good.
Yeah, so but it's even but for me, these all feel that they are not gained skills but lost skills. Like I had the ability to make myself mad and to think, this guy, he put me in danger, this, and then the ability to generate those thoughts that would feed the flames of my anger is just not there anymore. I try to get mad, and then nothing happened. Which of course
it's very common.
Is disempowering because being angry, at least for me, it's an empowering feeling, right? I'm big and I'm strong and I'm going to harm you or whatever. But at the same time, there was suffering in it, right? Like I had to suffer to kind of create that potency. And now I lost the potency and I've also lost the suffering with it, which
you can still play anger.
Yeah, I can. So I can perform it, and I have in fact done that a bunch, which is in a bunch of situations that would trigger me in the past. For some reason, I like to role play the reaction that I would have. I think almost to maximize how silly it is. So now I go through the external form, but inside nothing is happening, and inside I'm just like, damn, that was so silly what I was there.
Yeah. One of the things that I've found that is difficult is actually explaining the before and after. Like stream entry is stream entry. Like, oh, there. The capping is one thing. Weakening is even more interesting, right? Like you have the weakening of reactivity and like it feels a bit better and so on. The hardest part for anyone that I found is understanding that I should go for breaking of reactivity or drop reactivity or no longer or being non-reactive. Mm-hmm. I feel like for me, it's obviously there's almost like a different world. That discrete shift is what matters to the extent, like you mentioned, that 1% change makes all the difference because heavy weakening doesn't feel as good as being non-reactive as the default, as the baseline, no longer getting reactive.
Right.
So how would you describe the before and after, or how would you? I'm basically trying to find ways that people need to understand, like, whatever you want to do, you want to drop it. Like you want not to have it.
Oh, how I would describe the before and after of weakening?
Yes, weakening into breaking, basically. Like, how would you describe like the discontinuous shift?
I
Like,
don't
or
know.
rather, how do you feel like how do you feel it's meaningful? Because, like I said, we've discussed before, like so many people have weakened it, and people for whatever reason things come up and they don't finish the process, and it's sort of like I'm not sure if you realize. And I usually tell them like, okay, I'm not sure if you realize how much of a difference is from dropping. Like it's a certain, like that thing with quantum jumps, like like it's like it doesn't go back. So I think that what I'm curious about, like how would you describe that discontinuous jump?
Got it. So I would love to be a living advertisement for this, but we might need to punt this question into the moment that I've actually broken it. I don't believe I've broken it. So I only think I've weakened it. And I don't think I'm in the default
I think
non-reactive
this
thing.
starts another conversation, which and this is a conversation around expectations and what reactivity means. The expectation around reactivity is one, you're not going to act in conditioned ways, which might be more of a traditional way. It's like you've exhausted all your karma. It's like you're in a monastery and so on. And the difference between reactivity and conditioning, right? And I think that's a big one. And I find myself having to explain it. Like, if I'm asking you right now, it's like, so here's how I usually test with people. It's like reactivity is the sense of mental buildup, like the mental tension of kind of like pushing against experience. Like there's a thought that kind of plays that it's able to change your experience, right? So the easiest way for people to test, like, oh, do I have reactivity anymore, is to create that force field against thoughts. So like when I asked someone like, okay, can you push your thoughts away? What happens, right? Like what happens when you push your thoughts away? And with someone before dropping reactivity, what happens is like after a bunch, like if it's heavy weekend, it takes a bunch and then they notice a slight mental tension. It's like a bit of a, right? Like a bit of frustration, right? Someone that has dropped reactivity doesn't have that. That doesn't mean that it doesn't contract if something happens. It just means that the mental tension is gone. So that's a very important one. Like there's almost what's the word? An overselling of this thing into you no longer have conditioning. The problem is that a lot of conditioning has to do with the later fetters. So I've often come across this conversation, which is like, do you have the mental tension? Not that you have no longer conditioning, basically. So it's like if you're to check right now, right? Like if you're checking, do you find a mental tension when you're just pushing your thoughts away? And I think we also have this conversation before a bunch of times, so this is not the first time.
I don't think there is zero tension if I try to push them away. I think there is non-zero tension.
Yeah. So you see, so it's like that's how you differentiate for these things, which is super useful because like sometimes people have big glimpses, like it stays for a while, and if it's from the later fetters or from later conditioning, it might come back. But it's usually not the thing that is sort of like a problem. It's more so like, oh, there's more things to clean up. And like my approach is often like not inside, like look, there's no one to react. It's like, which is great. But oftentimes people, what they want is having both the non-reactivity and having the, what's it called? A very cleaned base. Like you mentioned, like after stream entry, people notice all the ways that they have resisted their experience. And when I started, I used to do mostly inside, right? Like just like, oh, there's no one to react or whatever. And then as I work with others, I sort of realized like, oh, no one cares about just that. Because what happens, they might not have the tension, which is common. You don't have the tension. And then you realize that you still contract in different situations. Like it's painful, but it's without the suffering. And that's where I feel like that's what we're getting in the whole unconditioned part, where feathers are nice, but you also want to be as unconditioned as possible, because generally people don't necessarily want just to have the inside, they want to all to feel good. Because I think we had this conversation and you had that graph where, let's say, stream entry cut a bit of the baseline, right? Like the down. And then you have the weakening, and then you have the dropping there. So like it brings it, right? But the problem what happens is like the baseline being very high, might be a problem for the highs because someone might have conditioning that keeps pulling back to baseline versus like being able to sit higher or to hit the peaks where you're just up and about, right? So I'm curious, like, again, I know you've tried a lot of stuff. Like, I know you tried all kind of stuff from TRE and going viral with it and so on. Like, for unconditioning your stuff, what are the things you've tried? I think we've done a bunch of bilateral stimulation, EMDR stuff together as well when I showed you the Core 100. What are the things that you've noticed that have done a difference to basically wrap that base?
Yeah, this is a good question. So I actually don't perceive myself as having tried a lot of stuff. So it's good that you think that I have. That gives me a new reference class. I think, yeah. So EMDR, we tried a bit of that. I did some somatic. So most recently, I did some somatic experiencing, and some just like basic beach developmental psychology. Yeah, and yeah, I feel like a lot of the stuff that I got was from surprising sources, basically. I had, so back, in 2013, so right after that Rising and Passing Away, where I was in this power that moment, I found this psychologist in Ljubljana who, he wasn't, so at the time in Ljubljana, you didn't need a psychology license to practice. He was a sociologist, right?
Yeah.
And he was like, I want to roam your mind. And I'm like, let's go. And I had just found Eugene Gendlin's Focusing. I was super into it. And so I would talk to this guy and we would just like roam my mind. And that was like one of the most helpful practices that I've done. More recently with an actual licensed psychologist and, also working on my stuff with her. But again, it comes from interesting places. So, very recently, I was writing a blog post, as I do, shortly after, just me and girlfriend in the house. She's in the shower. I don't know why, something comes over me. I open the Google Docs and I start writing all my feelings about my departed grandmother, the one I had mentioned in the beginning. Not sure where that came from, but I was basically typing and crying at the same time. Something shifts inside, and suddenly a lot of attachment that I had to that period of my life, to this great, 2 years or whatever in Vienna and Ljubljana, at this powered up level, the next day disappeared. So the memories were not as 4K HDD anymore. They were a little bit black and white. So I'm just kind of trying to navigate the flow, especially when something arises. And I feel like between 2013 and now, I went through some sort of phase shift where before mostly everything in experience is reactivity or something like that, right? Like I mostly just being triggered and reacting from there. And then phase shift, mostly it's not. And so now the few things that are really stand out. And when those come up, I deal with them. I think I might have made the mistake of trying to rely too much on myself in the past as a good rationalist, trying to be the hero or whatever to solve all of my problems myself. Now I just have the document. I type the stuff that comes up. I talk to the psychologist and I'm like, go, fix me, whatever. Right?
You do your thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's I think where I have landed on.
Yeah, I wanted to ask again. You've been on the path for a while, right? Like your spiritual path, let's call it, has been there for a while. One of the things that I'm actually curious, and that's been my experience working with a bunch of people, to the extent that you've had the experience of like seeing how it feels without having reactivity, how much the identity of the seeker of needing to go all the way and get enlightened versus like just dropping reactivity and working on your unconditioning, becoming way more unconditioned and basically returning to life. Because I think this is a very common thing where I'm working with people, like a few months, they deal with reactivity. And when they started, they're like, I kind of want to get enlightened. Like that's very important to me. And I think that's the thing that I need. And one thing that they found that is like, oh, actually, I didn't want to get enlightened. I kind of want to have not an issue with emotions, and I just want to start a business or start my family, whatever is the case. So I'm curious, how did your maybe identity and focus change as you sort of like got the benefits or got the goodies? Because I think a lot of this meditation and spiritual focused or whatever. Like I don't even want to call that. It's just like work around happiness doesn't provide results, right? So the way I feel like you know that something works is the extent that you want to not focus on the inner life, you want to focus on the outer life because it actually worked and you got the goodies. So how do you see it?
Yeah, this is a great question because it makes me feel like such a cliche. So, so in 2023, after that moment that I really want to be released from suffering, I super hardcore about it, meditating up to 3 hours per day. I ended up doing, I think, like 5 or so retreats between 23 and 24. All my books that I bought were Dharma books. All the stuff that I consumed on Twitter mostly was Dharma stuff. After stream entry somewhat, but especially after the other one, I chilled out a bunch, which was confusing maybe and disappointing at the time because I had been carrying this identity. Like this is, like I'm going for it. Like I'm going to go all the way and I'm going to get awakened. As you said, it's extremely important to me. And then I think, I don't know, like last year from May to December, maybe I didn't sit once. Like I was just
Yeah.
doing stuff. And it has recently picked back up, but with a very, very different energy, where before it felt like almost this like grind set, like desperate, like I gotta, it's do or die kind of energy. Now it's like, oh, I wonder what it would be like to sit now. Interesting, right? Like there's an ease and a curiosity where before it was this very hardcore pursuit. So yeah, I do feel like something has relaxed on that.
Yeah. I feel like it's very common and that's the extent to which I feel like something has worked. The extent that you kind of like find no need for it, basically. Or rather, like if you explore it, you explore it from another space. You did mention the part about being a rationalist and having been to a particular event about AI and the contemplative practice. I think like 2 weeks ago in San Francisco. I'd probably have seen that a lot of EAs and rationalists are indeed getting into meditation. So I'm curious, what was your transition like? And what do you feel the extent that you're seeing this, what's the word? Maybe transition from shrimp to basically curing suffering for humans for EAs and rationalists to the extent that you're very attuned to the mindset of a rationalist. How likely do you find it for them to be able to find the benefits without trying to more or less rationalize their way out of emotions? Because in a way, it kind of that's what it becomes about.
Yeah. So I think relevant background here is that I was a weightlifter when I was a kid from, I don't know, 15 to 21 or 22. And then I got a very serious injury and I couldn't work out for 6 months. But I still had this like, working out spirit. And so I decided, very rationally at the time for 22, I can't work out the body, I'm going to work out the mind. I go online, I find less wrong, and I'm like, this is it. I'm going to become more rational. And I get super into it. It's why I moved to Vienna to study cognitive sciences. It's because of less wrong. And eventually it led me to leverage research, which is where I got into contact with the book The Mind Illuminated. It's this book about meditation that was very popular a few years ago. After I would take to it because neither the weightlifting path and being, big and jacked and strong, however good that was, nor the rationalist path of trying to invest a lot in my epistemics and my instrumental rationality to try to like get at my goals helped in that day in 2023 when everything on paper, I met all the goals, but I was still suffering. And it was almost in a moment of desperation or despair, or like a Hail Mary, that I kind of did that shift. It wasn't an identity shift per se, because I don't think by that time I identified with them as much as I had in the past. Like in Vienna, I was organizing less strong meetups. Like that's that's the level I was into. And then as to your question about the transition, so I was kind of not paying attention to the community for the past 5 years or so. I know that Kai Sotala and Romeo Stevens are both like, well-respected figures that got really into meditation. My expectation is that it's almost a litmus test, which is, there's this thing that has, for some people, a weird reputation that makes big claims. Are you willing to test them? And are you willing to discover whether it's true or not for yourself on your own experience? It definitely was my experience that the rationalism was just psychological armor against the stuff I didn't want to feel. As was the weightlifting before that, people think is based or whatever. But it was the same thing. It was like literally physical armor building. And then, and then my experience in the path has been more like, that annoying quote, the treasure that you seek is in the cave that you most fear to enter, right? Like you kind of have to face exactly the thing you've been running from all your life. That has been my path. I'd be happy if other rationalists found it, if they are also suffering and in need of release for suffering. And then if they're not, more power to them. Keep updating your beliefs or whatever.
Yeah, that's gonna. Okay, this is more of a tongue-in-cheek question, but it's more so like, of the people that like are big accounts on Twitter, who do you think would need this kind of, let's say, updating? I'm curious. I think we've discussed a bunch of times, kind of laughing at. I think you were at a writing thing last year or early this year,
Haven,
and I was asking whether, so like the extent to which you feel that, what's his name, the Slater Codex guy?
Oh, Scott Alexander.
Yes, to the extent to which Scott Alexander would be more or less up to go to do this process. So I'm curious, what do you see as like, who would be some prime examples for us to get in this camp that we're currently, again, not that is an identity, more so like them experiencing the goodies.
Yeah, it's fun that you mentioned Scott Alexander because I've tried to be with him in the past, and I've basically found it impossible to do so ever since I met him in person, because he's like the chillest, kindest guy that I've ever seen. So it's plausible to me that he has something going on. Having said that, he has an essay. I don't remember the name, but he has an essay where he says something like that he believes that he can argue circles around his pool guy for whichever position. And so that the epistemically responsible thing for his pool guy to do would be to just not listen to him about anything, because he could just guide him anywhere, right? And in the same way, I feel like these people that have a lot of intellectual firepower can be quite difficult to convince, precisely because they have so much intellectual firepower, right? Like in my case, it was a blessing that I'm not that clever. And so I was desperate, because if not, right, I could have kept rationalizing and rationalizing and rationalizing.
Yeah.
All this to say, I think you probably have your work cut out for you. But also, I do believe that these people update on evidence, and I kind of think it's a matter of time. I suspect this is one of those first slowly, then all at once kind of things, where there's some weird tipping point where everyone is like, oh, okay. And actually, in fact, like as you said, and someone said on Twitter recently, apparently many EAs are into meditation now. That's surprising.
Yeah.
So it feels like it's spreading for sure.
Yeah, I'm curious mostly because I'm not sure if I'm on the spectrum. Like, I'm not sure. I'm probably not going to get tested. But in my blissful ignorance,
it's so hard to not say something. Go on, please. Please
say. No, please say.
No. There's probably many jokes to be made, and I'll make none of them. Please continue.
Yeah, I want to say that in my blissful ignorance, the way it started into Buddhism and with the Bodhisattva vow, the discussion is that, like, enlighten all beings. And in my blissful ignorance, I thought, I was like, we have a plan, right? Like, we have a plan. The same way I sort of like wondered about EAs and sort of like, they want to deal with suffering. And I was surprised, or I'm still surprised, that somehow they haven't landed hard on this camp of dealing with, so like moving from epistemology closer to phenomenology. It's sort of like, it's like you said, like it's a cheap experiment to run to see how much you're suffering or how much you're resisting your experience, and the payoffs are pretty great. So if you're closer to that camp and you understand better, I'm curious what you say the reason is as to why. Like, again, I have quite a lot of, let's say, friends adjacent to EAs, right? So it's not that sort of like journey, from my understanding, journey is on the radar, but somehow they haven't necessarily updated into giving it a try to that, and like closer to like a secular Buddhist vibe. So like, what do you say? Like, oh, that's the thing in the way for them, basically having the tipping point into exploring this.
Yeah, I suspect part of your confusion is that you're being owned by labels in a very autistic way, actually, which means nothing, of course. No. Just in the sense, there's a quote by Fernando Pessoa, a Portuguese poet I like a lot, who says, "In theory and practice are the same, but in practice they're not." And then, if you go read the sequences by Eliezer, there's one post about science as attire. So like, that the scientist is a guy not who does experiments, but the guy who wears a white lab coat, whatever, right? And all of the sequences is about not doing this. But there's definitely a vibe to what the rationalist is and how he presents, which is different from the sort of like minimal description of person who updates on evidence. Same thing for effective altruists, right? Like the minimal description of effective altruists is, person who finds the highest leveraged intervention to release suffering. But then you go look at them and they kind of, it's just a population of people, and there's fashions and they all kind of like move into a thing at the same time. There was a time that, the highest saddest thing to do was to do research. So everyone did research. Now it's AI. So everyone is doing AI. And yeah, I believe that being confused on this point would come from taking people's self-identity too seriously. It's like, you should, especially with rationalists, I don't believe you should expect them all to be as similar as they are, right? Like if you send a bunch of people off into the world and they all are like, perfect Bayesian agents or whatever, not just updating their beliefs, and then you bring them back together, I expect them to all be pretty different. But in fact, they're all kind of the same. And I love them, but they're all kind of the same. And so I believe what's happening is that all of them are a lot of them are performing being a rationalist, which means presenting and thinking a certain kind of way. I think with EAs, they're performing being an EA, which means presenting and thinking a certain kind of way, which is why you get tipping point dynamics. When at some point, the way to be an EA is to do meditation or whatever, or like part of what it means to be a rationalist is to do spiritual practices, then I would expect to see a shift. Less so with the rationalists because I think they're more disagreeable, but definitely with AEIs.
Got it. I actually have some transitions because, again, at this point, our teapot kind of becomes tech dharma. Like we're sort of like intertwined at this point. I feel like there's no way of separating AI space from dharma too much. Or you can, but you kind of go closer to the traditional camp and you probably get into another type of beef. This is something like, as you mentioned, valence. And like I have that funny graph with the value of a shift in happiness. I think I'm probably going to flash it on the screen.
Yeah.
I'm actually curious, how do you see this subject of basically quantifying happiness? And the reason why I'm saying quantifying happiness is because being in this space, we know a lot of people that do chase money. Like that's not necessarily, and that's not a bad thing. It's just the expectation. And this is the funniest meme that I found in a while, which is the discussion on permanent underclass, right? To the extent that you feel that it's is an adequate meme, I'm curious, how do you see this discussion about being on a permanent overclass or underclass, given how well-being is one, more of an exponential, and second, it has nothing to do with money. Like, how do you see this particular meme? Again, being the chief meme propaganda guy all around for us. So I'm curious how you see that.
There's shout out Daniel, right? The other podcast. He is doing some sort of A/B testing on YouTube, and the YouTube machine came up with this frame where it has like a little circle around my head and then an arrow, and then it says PSY-OP expert, right? And I don't know where this is coming from. I don't know where the thing you just said is coming from, but it must be true because you're saying it, and it shouldn't be.
I love
if you
it.
weren't. I was afraid that you would ask me this question. I was thinking about this question a little bit. The reason I was afraid is because I have hypothesized that a weird thing happened with myself with regards to you, right? So I think that you are basically the proximal cause for me to having weakened Fetters 4 and 5. I think that's priceless. I think there's nothing I could do. It's very weird because I notice my mind doing this, but I can't stop it. So I witness my mind going like, yeah, this was like a priceless change. There's nothing I could do to get this guy back for this. Therefore, I won't do anything.
Nice. Well, you're here. That's all that matters.
Therefore, I'm just going to forget about it and forget that this ever happened, which is so screwed up, right? Because it's like, I definitely spend money on stuff that doesn't give me as much or even a fraction, right? Like I play Magic the Gathering online. Shout out Magic the Gathering.
Shout out Magic the Gathering. Yes.
And they have this very nice flow. I suppose the thing that's happening here is that two things are getting confused. One is the ease of transfer of money from some entity to some other entity. And the other one is the value that's actually being delivered. Magic makes it very easy to transfer money to them, right? They call it cardboard crack. But it's not delivering that much value. If you compare it to something like this, it's not, in relative proportions, it's not delivering any value. And yet I can't help myself. In the same way, I feel that perhaps the graphs of offer and demand, right, that they meet at some point, and that's what makes a price, maybe they get skewed as you go to infinities. I don't know what happens when you go to infinities. It just becomes very, very hard. And I was literally thinking about this in the terms of, given that valence appears to be logarithmic, so it doesn't grow, it grows by orders of magnitude, like X a bunch of times, or it can 10x a bunch of times. I almost feel like there would not be enough money in the world to account for the value produced. So there's like insane consumer surplus going on. And then I'm this is why I was afraid. I'm met with this question of like, I have this sort of like infinite debt that I cannot dislodge myself from. So what do I do? And then it feels like the temptation of my mind is to rationalize it away and be like, oh no, it never happened. Go play Magic.
Yeah. So the funny thing to me is like not being able to quantify is the amount of chasing money, which is not like, again, when you haven't taken care of your base needs or even your higher needs, right? Chasing money more because somehow there's going to be almost like $1 million is going to be this amount of valence. You're going to get 5, you're going to get linear, right? So it's sort of like that meme of a permanent underglass seems to be plaguing a lot of SF. Like you can kind of see the vibe around, but somehow like it doesn't account for basically how the nervous system works, which is like expecting the thing, right? It's like we mentioned the conditioning earlier. The conditioning that someone has that would make their happiness at a certain level somehow is going to get outweighed by the money. You know what I mean? Like I make enough money and it's going to outweigh the conditioning, and I'm going to be happy and let's say rich, and that's what it means to be unconditioned. It's sort of like the unconditioning ends up with a monetary value of actual money, not the fact that they could quantify their happiness, basically.
Yeah. So my sense is the same thing is happening here as was happening with your analysis of the rationalists and the EAs, where it seems to me that you're modeling all of these people as individual, rational, strategic agents that are independently making decisions from one another. I don't think this is what's happening. I think this SF selects for a certain psychological profile. Striver, highly neurotic, etc., etc. And there's all of these memes in the water, and then people just latch onto those memes. At some level, I even believe there's some self-deception going on, of the sense of, I think people in startups do this on all the time, right? Aim for the moon. If you fail, like you'll land on the clouds or whatever, right? Like they'll go to not be in the permanent underclass and to be the richest, and they'll fail and they'll only be quite rich. And then at some point they do believe that the money is going to solve the problem, but it's just because that's what everyone believes. It's But it's like, but you're talking about SF, but it's the same thing in Portugal, right? Like everyone in Portugal believes, if only I had $1 million, then I'd be happy.
Yeah.
And it's like, you have no
it's
idea.
Very common.
You don't know what you're saying. It's just like $1 million for you is in a different conceptual register that is separate from physical material life right here. And you have created this fantasy. Also, the lottery plays into this. You have created this fantasy that's heaven. Once I'm a millionaire, once I'm rich, then blah. But it's this black box, right? That has no inner workings. And once you actually get there, you're like, oh, I was owned. I just have the problems that the person has once they have €1 million in Portugal, which is, people want my money, or I don't know who I can trust, or whatever. But it's not the path. But I think it's very common. I think it's generally spread in the West, and this permanent underclass just feels like a particularly potent mimetic distillation. But it doesn't feel different from, what a rando in Portugal believes, not in its type.
Yeah. I have this graph, and I think we discussed it a bit. This is the 2x2: have the thing, not have the thing, be happy, not be happy. Mm-hmm. This is basically the graph that I sometimes, when I work with someone and they're very contracted about getting a goal, or rather they don't want to do the feeling about a particular goal. It's like, if I feel good about not having this, I'm not gonna go for it. That's sort of like a thing. Like, I need to be contracted about not having it. Yeah. So one of the things is that, let's say someone wants a Ferrari, a big deal, right? Like, I want a Ferrari for whatever reasons. And the 2x2 would be like having the Ferrari, not being happy, having the Ferrari, being happy, not having the Ferrari, being happy, not having the Ferrari, being unhappy. One of the things that would be obvious is, like, in both cases, not being happy regardless of having a Ferrari or not. Everyone would say, like, or most people would say, like, not having the Ferrari is so and so, but like not being happy in both cases would be bad. Like I usually emphasize, like, you will have the Ferrari and you will be unhappy. And there are going to be some people like, I would rather try in the Ferrari, right? Mm-hmm. It's a very common joke. But one of the things that I've noticed that it doesn't dawn on people, and it just happens after they've been presented, is like how much it doesn't consider the possibility, like not having the thing and being happy. Which not having the thing and being happy is the same thing as not being contracted, not having conditioning about, not having the goodie. And this particular thing around the underclass, I feel like it points at this impression that somehow I can only be happy by having things. And as meditators, we sort of like, you almost, what's the word? So short circuit that thing where you just go toward the thing, like feeling good, right? Versus like, I'm here, whatever I'm happiness level, I'm going to get the thing, I'm going to be happy, right? Mm-hmm. The other crossing you can have, like, not have the thing, still be happy, which will be not moving through the intermediary having things. Basically unbundling having from feeling good. How do you feel your relationship to that change? Or rather, how do you see it in most people? Because again, I know you do analysis of humans, let's say, and how they think. So I'm curious. I'm not sure if you have a name, because you know better the terms. I'm mostly curious about that second order degree of like getting the thing and being happy versus whatever we're doing right now, which is closer to like wherever you are, go directly to being happy.
Yeah. Study humans makes me sound like a mad scientist.
Well,
so I think the main thing that's going on here is that we're dealing with a set of very entrenched memes that are so entrenched that everyone reflects them to one another. And so they become the water in which everyone swims, right? Like, I think in the Constitution of the United States, they consecrate your right to seek liberty and the pursuit of happiness, not happiness, the pursuit of
Yeah.
happiness, right? So from the get-go, happiness is framed as something that you're supposed to asymptote but never actually reach. In general, people seem to have this conception that happiness is an add-on, that the default is this sort of neutral, and that you will get
Yeah.
happiness through the acquisition of something. This of course has interesting connections to our economic system that I'm probably not qualified to comment on, but just to notice. There's a quote I like a lot, which is, you already have all of the things you said would make you happy. And I feel like it just takes a little bit of going through this loop of, once I have this, then I'll be happy. Nope. Once I have this, then nope. And then at some point you're like, same thing with getting $1 million. You're like, I was owned. I believed something that was false. And now, like a good rationalist, I'm going to update my beliefs. As it turns out, as you're pointing to, happiness seems to be the default if you're just not contracted. And people are doing, right. And then people are doing this very weird deal where they're using contraction as dirty fuel to motivate themselves to keep going, to get the goals that they believe are going to make them happy. But it's the contraction, it's the dirty fuel that's making them unhappy, or that is like clouding or whatever the happiness that could already be there. So there's a way in which they're like sabotaging themselves in this very weird loop. But it's also very, very hard to get out of, because it's what everyone in society is giving you. And the moment you start kind of veering away from that, you're a little bit of a weirdo. And now you're at odds with your social group, which I think a lot of people also find very, very painful. Probably better to belong and be miserable than to be happy and don't belong.
I have two examples here. Actually, I have a few local friends in SF that I've been trying to guide for a while into dropping reactivity, and they made progress in weakening, and they literally run into this particular thing, which is dirty fuel as productivity lever, let's say. And the concern oftentimes ends up being like, if I don't have this, if I don't have the resistance to how it feels or this particular thing, I won't do things, which is a very interesting one, because the assumption is almost that if I don't have the resistance to pain, the pain won't bother me. Or rather, it's sort of like, if I take an Advil for a headache, I won't seek to basically feel good. In a way, it's almost like an interesting, weird logic that somehow not resisting pain is the same thing as not doing anything about the pain. So how do you see it? And again, I'm actually curious from the standpoint of you having changed your fuel. Do you feel like after you haven't resisted as much, or not having used emotions as the dirty fuel, do you feel like you're less productive? And like, I have my own answer about this, but I'm curious about you. Like, what's your relationship with productivity, with creativity, as you use less of aversion as the fuel?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so I think two things. I think one, I'm far more productive, and two, it might have been able to expect that from my previous standpoint. And I think the reason is, previously, I think I would have this bursts of productivity, and then I would basically burn out because there was so much resistance, and I was kind of trying to push through the resistance, and then I would come back. And then if I just take snapshots of the moments that I am productive, I was incredibly productive. If I take snapshots of the whole time, not as much. Whereas now, there's not those crazy bursts, but there's not the burnout basically either. And I feel like what I've lost in intensity or something, I've more than made up for in endurance. So I can just sit and go for hours and hours and hours and hours, because whereas before, there was this tension that was growing and accumulating, and at some point was unbearable. Now it's not, or it accumulates much slower. So I can just go for a very, very long time in a way that I couldn't before, both within like a day and over a period of days.
Yeah, it's very common to want to hold on to this. And I think what, like you said, the tipping point ends up being the most important. Like, I'm not happy the extent to which social proof is making this thing attractive. You know, like
Mhm.
the extent to which more and more people can say like, oh, I'm using the clean fuel and I'm doing way better is gonna be the thing that's gonna move the needle in the end, right? The same thing, which if you think about like that's what happened with Janas. Enough people talked about in Teapot, and eventually it's like, oh, maybe there's a there. The same way I
Mhm.
feel like about clean fuel. Enough of us speaking about it. One of the things that I'm actually curious, and I'm exploring this, and I've asked you about it, the whole discussion around like AI taking off and whatever, how smart it's gonna get. How much do you feel like it's possible? Like, like everyone is selling us these very interesting futures about, let's say, abundance of everything that AI is gonna provide and UBI or whatever. I'm actually curious the extent to which you feel, and this is half of the discussion, the extent to which you feel that AI will enable the whole mass enlightenment en masse. If you feel like it's very likely, or if you feel like it's an issue of willingness and just having better guides in the form of AI for well-being won't necessarily lead to increases in well-being.
This is a question I've probably never thought about, I think. I have no idea. It's hard to say because. So my first answer was going to be something like, well, I feel like the human element is important and direct transmission, blah, blah, blah. But then I remembered we've never met in person, right?
Yeah. No, we didn't
Yeah,
get a chance because I wasn't able to make it to Portugal. Yeah.
exactly. So, like, as far as I'm concerned,
I'm an AI. I'm an
like from
AI.
from a practical point of view, like you are indistinguishable from me, right? Like you're just pixels on a screen or like sound over a telephone.
Yeah.
And you've definitely helped me make progress. So it feels that in theory,
Yeah.
I don't see why it couldn't work. And then I guess
Yeah.
it's more of a question of, where they're directed and who's directing them to do what. My understanding is that at least the anthropic people are very gung-ho on journey and all of that. So that seems like a positive leading indicator. I almost feel like the most interesting question is what happens if AI actually does take care of all of the sort of, basic material needs of everyone. And then it
I'm
feels to me
curious.
that
I'm
then, yeah,
skeptical, but
exactly.
I'm curious.
Exactly. But if it were possible, it feels to me that then at some point, like this is the thing that remains, right? Like if those are taken
Yeah.
care of, then the spiritual is what
Because
remains.
I want to ask, do you happen to know Scott Alexander's Samsara article slash whatever essay? Do you happen to know it?
Maybe I've
It's
read
one
it.
of my favorite ones. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's like from 2019, and basically the essay is about basically the last unenlightened person remaining on the planet. So
Mm-hmm.
whatever happens, something like a golden lotus thing, they basically figured out a way to do enlightenment at scale, and somehow everyone is in it, and they sort of like need the last person to, how should I put it, to get enlightened, so that it's sort of like a planetary thing. But the joke is that they start by trying to get him to get enlightened in the usual way. It's like come and sit with us, everyone is enlightened, you're gonna enjoy it. And the guy is very like, no, I don't want to do it. And then eventually realizing that they cannot do it, they go like they basically solve all his issues. Like everything that he needs is
Mm-hmm.
solved. But
Mm-hmm.
the way it gets to him is like, oh, we think like they think they happen to realize that he enjoys the worldly pleasure, and he basically gets inundated with all the worldly pleasures and all the things that he assumed that he needed to be happy, that he of his own accord starts meditating. So like he
Mm-hmm.
got everything taken care of, and so like all these people are annoying him, that he end up basically on the other side where he starts basically meditating, and that's how they get him.
Yeah.
So in a way, so like one thing I'm noticing, and the reality is most of the people that I end up working with, they have most of the things that I think that needed. Like I'm working
Mm-hmm.
with people that have the family, have the job or the career or the business. They sort of like have the trappings, let's call them trappings, in the sense of like the things that they feel like it's gonna trap happiness in their in their lives, and it's not there. So it ends up being that you didn't get the happiness. You got the things, and it's sort of like it doesn't necessarily dawn initially how much the problem is the conditioning. So that's going towards the unconditioned. It ends up being a subtractive process, basically. So it's sort of like, what do we do when we got everything? It says like, we don't need more. We need less. We're sort of like,
Yeah.
I need less of this, less of this, less of this. Because I was thinking, this is like, okay, whatever happens with AI, I'm curious how you say like, what do you say that are essentials that you feel like a lot of people don't have them right now, right? It's like, what could AI provide more that a lot of people, like, let's say in the developed country, because we have the argument that there are countries where a lot of things are lacking, but it's sort of like, what's lacking for a lot of people in the US or Portugal, or right, that they are unhappy. So it's sort of like, can AI, or does AI need to bring more? I'm curious, like, how is, because again, I have an impression of you that you do look at people a lot. So I'm curious how you see them, because I'm mostly interested in like, what do you feel like AI can bring more? Or rather, can AI go directly where like you provide one way or another ways of getting these mental health benefits from not necessarily the path, but just good phenomenological clarity?
Yeah. Well, first, I think Portugal and the US are very different cases.
Yeah.
Portugal is, all things considered, relatively poor and
Yeah.
depressed country. I think like 20% of people are either on antidepressives or anti-anxiety medication. So lots of work to be done there. People also work incredible hours, so they don't have time, even if they wanted. Like a sort of perennial problem for me is I can't meet with people only on the weekends, and then they have whatever going on. So I don't feel like they have the free time that would be necessary to explore that. Now, obviously, not obviously, I believe Keynes expected that by now people would only work like 20 hours a week or something. And then if everyone suddenly had 20 hours more, I can imagine something happening. At the same time, it seems like a lot of what people want are positional goods, right? Like you want to have more than the guy next to you, and that's the thing you're tracking. You're not tracking absolutes. So well, of course, the hack that you could do here is make enlightenment itself a positional good, right? Like you just make it a status good or whatever. But yeah, it does feel different to me, a future where, you know, like we snap our fingers, AI fooms whatever, but doesn't kill us all, and then no one has to work, and then suddenly everyone has 40 hours free per week. At that point, I expect some sort of revolution to our economical system. Like I like to think of spiritual economics and then how things would go there. But obviously, zero certainty. Like we're far into the realm of the speculative now.
My impression, and I think I probably have mentioned to you, I think looking at what's happening even on Twitter, I read posts from people, let's say software engineers, that kind of got a big downgrade in meaning from AI being able to code. And I think that happens to a lot of let's say, what's called, is it white collar? I would say, maybe, I would guess. Yeah. So basically a lot of people, and I think more and more jobs and professions will get a bump in their meaning making from AI, right? Like it feels like it's kind of unraveling. Like if you used to get your happiness from being good on the totem pole of the company because of your good programming skills or from your being a good designer, AI being able to basically reproduce a lot of it does take a hit. So my impression oftentimes is that the problem ends up being not at the level of goods, how much that it impacts the meaning machine, right? So it's sort of like almost like even before all that goodies from AI would happen, I think it's already the unraveling of happiness, or the conditioning that was providing some good feelings to someone is already attacked. That it's almost like it's a need to have AI or whatever. Like I actually think right now, like AI companies have a duty to provide means for enlightenment at scale because they're so like already attacking the meaning making machine. And again, I know you're really focused on meaning and such, so I'm curious how you see the connection between meaning and jobs and AI.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think that something that was very interesting for me recently with Ozempic is how we kind of all got on this problem together, that we all have access to extremely caloric foods, right? We kind of went from one extreme of not having, the problem being you don't have access to enough calories, to you have access to way too many calories and you have to control yourself. But then the fact that that was almost a planetary scale problem made it so that the market incentive was there to develop a solution. And then we developed Ozempic, and now everyone is skinny and hot and fit and whatever else. It seems that there's a way in which, if this is happening, it's kind of happening for everyone at once. And the political incentives to solve it are going to be very, very strong. It also seems that, again, we're far from my area of expertise, that governments are already making moves to have some say in the way that these AI companies develop. I've seen all sorts of interesting speculations that the current balance of power between the elites and the people are just because we needed people to man the jobs, and once we don't, it kind of shifts. Not as needed, right? So you could have a scenario where you just let them go by the wayside. And obviously, it would be better to have a scenario of the kind that you're saying, where if in fact lots of people are deriving meaning from their jobs, and then that gets taken away all at once, that AI companies and/or governments take the responsibility for providing an alternative in the way of this like spiritual goodies, as I think you would say.
Yeah. You just mentioned Ozempic earlier, and I had just had this funny idea of like Ozempic for the soul. That's what we have to do. Like we need to do some Ozempic for the soul. One of the things that where they started is mostly that I'm seeing very, very obvious ways in which more things, and again, like money is just one of the avenues, right? But it's in general like we need more things to be happy versus we need a subtraction to be happy. And I think this is mostly what, I wouldn't say meditators, I would say anyone just dealing with their phenomenology finds out that more things are not necessarily going to outrun the conditioning. So they end up in a space where they have more, but they feel less good, let's say. One of the last things I want to ask is about something that I feel like you're doing at Casatillo, if you want to plug it. You're writing.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So 30, I'm going to screw this up.
It's okay. We cut it in production.
We'll fix this in post. So 30 of August this year to 5th of September, there's going to be a writing residency at Casatillo, which is in Spain.
Yes, in Spain.
And basically, the way that it works is you go there, you have some mentors, you have writing workshops, you publish. This is inspired by Inkhaven, which was a similar residency that Lighthaven put together November last year. We publish every day. If you fail to publish, I don't think you got kicked out, but you might. It's ambiguous. Who knows? In any case, for people who have a bunch of drafts and a bunch of backlog and they want to be in a place where they want to blog and be with other bloggers and get their stuff out. Oh, and who are European? This is exclusively for Europeans. I don't make it work. I would highly recommend it, and I'll be there. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much, Vasco. This was the first, technically, but also the 5th episode of Unconditioned. See you on the next one, and thank you so much for joining me, Vasco.
Okay, great. See you, Michael.